Recording in progress.
You see?
Okay. How's it now?
Nah, it's still the same. Maybe it's better. I don't know. Oh yeah, that's right. It's better.
Is it?
I don't. Yeah, there is no echo, right?
I hear the echo, but because we can speak slow. I mean, Howard
Okay.
it's okay. So
All right. Let's continue.
Okay, the basic point is we're in the first century Christian era. The emperors are in charge. They're not as military aggressive as they were before, so the slaves are way more expensive. I don't have good numbers on that. I think in the 19th century southern US, they largely cut off the slave trade. The slave trade from Africa was cut off, so slaves were raised locally and they were expensive. It had to be raised from infancy, and so they became expensive as hell. They were like a couple $1,000s each in a day when a working man would be lucky to earn a couple $100 a year income. The Romans would have had a similar problem, and a gladiator has to be a big hulking brute to be properly entertaining. You can't just send 12-year-old kids in to kill themselves. It's not what the Romans wanted. They were also running spectacles. The emperors had to run spectacles that were elaborate, expensive. But what it meant is that the gladiators being expensive were not expendable, and there was a willingness to not. They were less willing to kill them. We hear a lot of stories about wealthy people, about people volunteering to become gladiators. The death rate may have been low enough that looked like a good idea in the first century AD. It was probably, I walked you through an incident where people in the Republic era volunteered. I suspect the volunteers went down later on, but during the period of Nero and these guys, it was, they did it. I have at least one, I've got a book on the ancient engineers, and they mentioned that Nero did not let the gladiators kill each other in the arena. I can't find anything backing that up. This is one of the reasons the Romans hated Nero. He was a complete wuss. But
he let Christians be killed, right?
Yeah, he was murderous as hell, but didn't like gladiators killing each other.
Oh, by the way, weren't some gladiators like celebrities?
Yes, they were. No, we're headed there. We'll get there. I'm just noting. I'm discussing, going through the first century AD here, and just understanding what they were doing.
Sure.
Understand what there's a first century AD. Gladiators expensive as hell. The emperor's doing most of the shows in Rome. I would wonder if the shows out in the provinces, guys out in the provinces would probably have smaller budgets. And would look for ways to save money.
Less population too, and less stadiums too. So
yes, yep. Well, I don't think. I guess gladiator games are. I don't know how economically rational Rome was. Rome was the center of the empire. It was where the emperor ruled from. They were bringing food from North Africa and stuff like that. I don't know how much economic sense Rome made. The Romans were warriors. They weren't merchants or the guys in charge. Image of gladiators. Infamia. The gladiators were infamous. They were extremely low social class. They were widely regarded as scum. You need to treat this cautiously because these are Roman patricians regarding them as scum, and they regarded a whole bunch of people as scum. So actors were scum, prostitutes were scum, working people in general, anybody who worked for a living were scum.
someone different from them was scum.
Possibly that the gladiators were not buried in the regular cemeteries; they were buried elsewhere. So maybe they were scummier than everybody else. But people still admired them. The Romans, the gladiator combat was a demonstration of Roman manliness. It was Romans demonstrating all the traditional Roman virtues of courage and in the faith, of skill and courage and stuff like that. And the gladiators that displayed these qualities were admired. We know a lot about. You got to distinguish between guys like Cicero writing. You look at the graffiti in Pompeii. Ordinary people were obsessed with gladiators and clearly admired them. Did those ordinary plebeian working class people regard the gladiators as scum and keep them in separate burial grounds? I don't know. The quote here is from Juvenal. It's about some old lady discussing her favorite gladiator, and it says, one dud arm held promise of early retirement, deformities marred his feature, a helmet scar, a great wen. A wen is a benign, sebaceous means it's runny or got pus on it, something like that. A great wen on his nose, an unpleasant discharge from one constantly weeping eye. What of it? He was a gladiator. That makes anyone an Adonis. So the gladiators were a huge sex symbol. This thing here, that thing we see is a little dangly thing. I think it's supposed to pull on to make the bells ring. He has it's supposed to be a gladiator. He has an enormous penis, which is turning into a wild animal of some kind, and he's getting ready to chop this off. And if I were a sex therapist, I could try to make sense of that thing. This is a common Roman theme. You have to remember, we try to see the Romans as very straight-laced, and they were a lot less inhibited about sex. This is a painting they found on a wall in Pompeii. Apparently, when they dig things up in Pompeii, in the past, they've had to censor stuff or remove the naughty bits and things. This is a painting in somebody's bedroom.
Howard, just to add to it a little bit.
Doesn't look wild to me.
What's that?
So what?
Doesn't look wild to me.
So
Pretty
basically,
normal,
what I'm
right?
trying to add, what I'm trying to add, Howard, is the gladiator sweat was used by Roman women as a holy water, basically.
As an aphrodisiac, yeah.
Aphrodisiac, yes, correct.
Yeah, there was also something about using a spear dipped in gladiator blood to comb her hair.
Well, in weddings, correct.
Yeah. There was all kinds of stuff. The gladiators were totally sexy, as far as I'm concerned.
Actually, when I was in Pompeii many years ago, I'm talking about maybe 41, 42 years ago, there was a room which is, everybody tells me, inaccessible now, a room in a bath where there was along the wall, all of the sexual position were frescoes of.
Yeah.
And
I think
I don't know if it's
now, were the baths men only, or were women? So the other question is, the women. My literature all here says the women, ladies, were properly dressed and very proper in their behavior. But in a bath, would they be dressed would be in a separate bath, or would they be naked with everybody else? I'm not sure about that. I think the Romans were less inhibited about this stuff than we are. And when we read about gladiators being scum, we're reading the opinion of people who regard quite a few people as scum. I think you have to watch for that. Gladiator. This is a gladiator. What was this one? That's why I marked this one out. This is gladiators from the Enlightenment mosaic, and I should have written down what the hell that was. We do know what this is. I find it really useful to use Roman mosaics because this is people actually know what these guys look like. This guy here is a Thrax. Which is a Thracian, and he's fighting a Murmillo. That is a this is supposed to, that's a Hoplomachus. You can tell by his round shield, and it looks like the Murmillo he's fighting is submitting. That is a Summarudus. He's a referee. He's refereeing the combat, and they're not indicating what that guy is. I can't make sense of it. He's got quite a. I'm thinking he might be. Hang on, this is second century. I was thinking he might be what's the word? He might be a Samnite, but second century BC, second century Christian era is not likely. So lovely little thing here. Training. The gladiators were slave captors, volunteers.
Before you move to the next slide, all those clothing, all those are expensive. All that.
We'll get to that. Guys are wearing loincloths, they're carrying shields, they're wearing very fancy helmets. I'm actually wondering about that one myself. I will bring that one up. Yeah, again, we're talking, this is second century Christian era. Rome is still pretty wealthy and powerful. The 5 good emperors are in charge. Well, Rome is wealthy and powerful. if somebody kills a gladiator, you can reuse his kit.
Another question, did they bid for money? Like, I have my gladiator bid, you know, $10 that he's going to win or not?
Well, I would assume, I'd be very surprised if they didn't.
Okay.
Or if you're an ordinary guy on the stands, you say, oh yeah, Asiaticus is going to kick Rodan's ass, and you bet me back that Rodan's going to win. And yeah, there's no way that didn't happen. I didn't see anything saying that it did. But
right.
What about the stories that the Roman matrons were seeking sexual relationship with gladiators, with the celebrity gladiators?
Terry Jones mentioned that there was a gladiator house or something like that with 18 gladiators in it and the remains of a wealthy old lady. So the question is the old lady in there to get sex, or did she simply run in there when the volcano exploded? We don't know. Maybe she owns the gladiator.
Well,
we can't tell.
Yeah, well, that's here where we cannot trust Robert Graves, because he's saying that even Messalina had sex with gladiators.
Right. Who knows? I didn't look at that one carefully. The women found the gladiators sexually attractive. I was thinking, what was I reading? I recently read a biography of Pitchfork Van Tillman. A fairly standard thing the Southerners they did in the Southern U.S. is they projected the Romans of sexual hang-ups onto the blacks. So the understanding was the blacks were oversexed and are going to get our women. I wonder if Roman patricians were projecting this onto the gladiators. So the problem here is when you go through the literature, you're seeing all the written, other than the graffiti on the walls, other than the graffiti on the walls in Pompeii, you're seeing stuff written by patricians that held gladiators in contempt, they held women in contempt, they held working people in contempt, they held musicians in contempt. Working for living, bad. It's really tricky. I think the information is highly unreliable. Given that there were tens or hundreds of thousands of gladiators, somebody probably had sex with a wealthy lady. Gladiators were slaves, captors, and volunteers. They swore an oath. They surrendered all hope of survival. They agreed to be burnt, bound, or slain by the sword. They were assigned to class. They were assigned to gladiator class and trained in the gladiator. When you were a gladiator, I'm going to go through the gladiator class. I'll go through some of the gladiator classes anyway. When you were a gladiator class, you had you wore a distinctive kit, and you developed a distinctive fighting style. So in gladiator school, you had to learn that, and there are several reasons why this is interesting. They talk about gladiator ludus. From what I can tell, a ludus is a school. So you could have a ludus for gladiators, you could have a ludus for teaching your kids. It's not a particularly unique term. The gladiators were trained with weapons with wooden weapons that were heavy. They were heavier than the sharp metal weapons. I believe the Roman army did this too. The idea was to strengthen the muscles and get a good workout. They were trained in general combat, evaluated, and then they were trained as their gladiator class. They were assigned stage names. My source mentions the name Flamma, which means slain. Astidus, Rodan, I'm looking at a graphic of Asiaticus. This is sort of a stage name. One of the other references describe these as pet names or slave names. The gladiators were fed a carbohydrate-rich diet to bulk them up. And they were nicknamed Barley Boys. These big fat guys. They think it was believed. I've seen YouTube videos claiming they debunked this, I think, but it was believed that by being a big fat guy, you can withstand sword wounds better. The Romans were impressed at big, bulky guys. That was manly.
Howard, did they have any drugs?
I've not seen mention of anything. I'd be very surprised if they didn't have access to alcohol.
Hard to win if you drink before.
Well, this is where it gets interesting. This is just a screen capture from Terry Jones's special. Terry Jones has a good program on Gladiators, although he doesn't really have it in for the Romans. Gladiator classes. And let's go to the Gladiator class as best we can. Samnites. The Samnites were the original gladiators. These are people the Romans waged war against. I think that is the Samnite. Significant point here in Livy's account of the War of the Samnites is apparently they had really cool kit. They had gold and silver plated shields and plumed helmets and stuff like that. And it looked really magnificent. And according to Livy, the magnificent thing about the Romans was their courage and skill, and they proceeded to defeat the Samnites. So but in a gladiator show, you had people dressed as Samnites, and presumably had all kinds of feathers, and everybody could laugh at them. And on my interpreter's illustration, I don't know if this is a contemporary. This may be from a book from the 19th century, but it looks like this guy's dropped his shield. In combat, you drop your shield and you surrender. When you want to surrender, you drop your shield.
His arm is extremely long.
What's that?
The arm is extremely long.
These people are, drawing is difficult. Let me tell you. Now, how did I do that? Oh, I know what I did. I did this in approximate chronological order, but there was a good reason to mess it up. Rotarius. The Rotarius is the guy with the net and the pitchfork. He was normally in combat with either a Secutor or a Mormilla who chased him around the ring. The Rotarius wore a loincloth. He's got a little arm, he's got a metal arm protector on there on the side, doesn't have a helmet on. The Romans regarded the Rotari as effeminate. The proper manly thing is to have is to be big and bulky and have armor on and be covered in armor and stuff. The armed guards, an interesting bit of technology. In a battle, you notice that I think one or two classes, and none of the major classes wore armor over the chest, which is almost the first place you put armor on. I would wonder if these guys in combat, if you're trying not to kill each other, you can bash the crap out of the other guy's shield or bash the crap out of his arm. You can bash away at his armor protector, and it will look really cool, and nobody gets hurt. I'm wondering if that's how the armor worked. The Romans identified something called the Rotarius Tuitatus. These are net men with tunics. These were particularly contemptible. And there is something here by, where's my notes? Where classes, Rotarius. There was something here. Right, there's a poem by Juvenal entitled Effeminate Rome. This is it. I'm just reading. That can't be it. Here again. No, Juvenal, Effeminate Rome. Here we go. This is one of Juvenal's satires. Gracchus has given a dowry of 4,000 gold pieces for a horn player, or one perhaps who plays the straight pipe. The contract's witness, felicitations. A whole crowd asked to the feast. The bride is in quotes. The bride reclines in the husband's lap. Oh, you princes, is it a censor we need or a prophet of doom? Would you find it more terrible, think it more monstrous? Truly, if a woman gave birth to a calf or a cow to a lamb, he's wearing brocade, the long full dress and the veil. He who wore the sacred objects tied to the mystic thong, sweating under the weight of shields. O Romulus, father of Rome, why has this evil touched the shepherds of Latium? Where is it from, the sting that descendants ours? Can you see a man noted for birth, wealth, wed to another man, and your spear not beat the ground, your helmet stay firm, and no complaint to the father? Away then, forsake the stern campus acres, you neglect now. I have a ceremony to attend, at dawn tomorrow down the vale. Quirinus, why is that? Why? Oh, a friend of mine's marrying a male lover of his. He's asked a few guests, live a while, and we'll see it happen. They'll do it openly, want it reported as news in the Daily Gazette. Meanwhile, there's one huge fact that torments these brides, that they can't give birth, and by that hang on to their husbands. But it's better that nature grants their minds little power over their bodies. Barren they die with her secret medicine chest. Full in lies no use, nor a blow from the agile Luperci. Yet Gracchus beats even this outrage. In tunic, with trident, a gladiator circling the sand as he flits about the arena, a nobler in birth than the Marcelli or the Capitolini, and the scions of Catullus and Paulus or the Fabii, than all the front row spectators, including himself, the one who staged that show with the nets and tridents. So basically, some noble Roman is married to another man, and now he's dressed up in a tunic and a tyrant, and he's acting as a retiarius in the arena. I'm guessing that the combat is survivable. And Juvenal and of course Juvenal is absolutely horrified. Where is that from? This sting that hurts your descendant Mars. Murmillo. The Murmillo is a heavy gladiator. The Murmillo wears a helmet with fish crest or theme. I did this one. I don't see fish on this one. But the carvings on there, the decoration.
Howard, before you get to Murmillo,
yeah.
Quick question. So
What?
The retirees that you just mentioned, it used to take them longer to train because if you miss the net, you kind of shit out a lot, right? Because then you get stabbed or killed. Because if you don't use net properly, then you basically get killed every time.
I didn't see that. I didn't see anything to that effect. The Rotarius, hang on, back in there. The Rotarius has a trident which is long, so we can keep the other guy. Almost all the Roman gladiators were equipped with small swords. So that trident can keep the guy at a distance, for one thing. You also notice that he is I don't see a net there in that picture. And I'm looking at the other, more often than not, there's no net in sight. So were they trained? It's possible. I didn't see anything saying the Rotarius had to be trained better. Training them better might be a way of making them more manly. Apparently that was a big issue with the Romans. But if you watch, I've got a couple more mosaics showing Rotari, and more often than not, there's no net. So maybe he threw the net and he switched to his trident. Remember, if I'm not carrying a net, I can use two irons. I can use two hands on that spear, and that's an advantage. The Murmillo, we look at the other helmet here. They're supposed to be fish themed. You look at this picture here, you can see this. They got fish scales on the helmet. Carried a scutum shield. Carried scutum is a big Roman hexagon, big Roman rectangular shield. There's a scutum. So there, the gladius is a Roman short sword. There's gladius. The manica is an armed guard. I got a good picture of one there. It's on a glad. I don't think this guy's glad. This guy's dressed as a legionary. On a gladiator, it's weird. The guy's in a loincloth and a helmet, and he's got one arm protected. I find that fascinating, and that sort of tells me if I'm fighting and I'm actually not trying to kill the other guy, there's an opportunity for me to do cool stuff without causing damage. So I'm really fascinated at that. The Murmillo, the gladiator types rarely fought each other. They usually fought some other class. So the Murmillo would fight a Thracian or a Hoplomachy. Well, we'll get to those. Secutor. A Secutor is based on the Murmillo. They wore this funny helmet. They figured this helmet's designed so it doesn't get hooked by a net. So if you're fighting against, and he's called the pursuer, so this is the guy that would normally go up against a retiarius. So the retiarius throws his net and it doesn't catch the helmet. So it sounds like the retiarius were actually winning their fights too much. Otherwise, he's wearing a loincloth. He's got a scutum shield, gladius, protection. The Thracian. That one is the Thracian. He's got a small rectangular shield. He carries a really interesting sword. I believe that's the sharp side. So the idea is you can hook around somebody's shield and stab them. He's got, I don't see greaves in the picture. Supposedly they wear greaves. They wear a brimmed helmet. I don't have a good picture of the shields and a fancy leather belt and whatever. Supposedly they're supposed to be Thracians. Hoplomachus is based supposedly a Greek hoplite. The shield is called a hoplon here, but it's not a hoplon. It's quite a bit smaller. A Greek hoplon was quite large. It was designed to protect you, and it was protect it. With a hoplon, you protect yourself and you protect the guy snuggling up behind you in a formation. Whereas this is one-on-one combat. They carry a sword. They carry a spear. I think the only gladiator normally has a spear, and they fought Merlins and Thracians. We know what the uniform, remember, we know what the kit looks like. We have no clue how they used it. Couldn't find a picture of the Gaul. The Gauls and the Samnites disappeared as classes in the by the 1st century AD because they're both integrated in Roman society, and presenting them as enemies was insulting. I don't really have a good description of Gallic. I went searching around. I couldn't find anything on Gallic kit. They were supposedly heavy gladiators, and I guess being a heavy gladiator was good. It made you more manly. But like I said, this is the best I can do. And funny gladiatresses, the gladiatresses, they existed. This is a relief showing Amazonian Achilles and Achillia. So it's women. They're fighting. They fought. The fight is missio, which means presumably it's either a draw or the loser is being spared, and they continue being gladiators. They've taken their helmets off. I'm guessing that they're secutors or secutori, but I don't know that. If you find some account saying there's something else, believe it. So women used the same as the men. They fought in the loincloth. They fought topless. They did the gladiator classes, from what we can tell. The records are very, ladies of noble birth volunteered to do this. Most of our knowledge of them is writers writing against the practice. They were horrified. What do I miss? I know I missed something here. Go atrophies. Where are we here?
Howard,
yes.
By the way, you mentioned the Gauls. You said they disappeared mostly like when in the 1st century CE, right?
By about the 1st century CE, the Gauls and the Samnites were integrated within Roman society.
Right. Samnites must have been earlier than that.
Well, the issue is that in a gladiatorial combat, when you got a Gaul and a Samnite fighting in the arena, you're insulting Gauls and Samnites. This is good fun watching the scum slaughter each other. Right. If you got to the point where you don't think Gauls and Samnites are scum, then you come up another gladiator class.
Yeah, but at the time of Spartacus, Crixus was the leader of Gauls. We're talking about like 70 BCE.
Yeah.
So that was the largest group of gladiators at that time, so 1st century BCE. But I don't think they had Samnites at that time already. They already were integrated, probably.
So the Samnites were there. I'm not sure when I don't have a precise, clear date when the Samnites sort of faded out.
Yeah, because Samnite wars were in the 3rd century BCE, right?
They were, yeah.
So they must have integrated within 100 years or something.
Maybe. Both Pyrrhus and I haven't read enough about Hannibal as I should have. Hannibal was able to maintain himself in central Italy for 19 years. So the locals were feeding him. So
yeah,
I don't know how loyal people were. In any case,
southern,
the fact
because they were mostly Greek.
The fact that somebody in the arena is dressed as Samnite doesn't mean he's a Samnite.
Okay.
You could be a Gaul. You bring your prisoners back. You hand your Gaul. Okay, you and you.
Oh, just dressed as a Samnite.
And you dress them as a Samnite.
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure some knights were integrated. Like in the first century BC, they were already well integrated.
Probably, I'm not. It's impossible that basically the Samnites and the Galluses became less common in gladiatorial combat and they disappeared. I couldn't give you a timeline. Remember, most of what I'm going over the gladiator classes. I would call this first century Christian era. As we move back, probably during the Republic, it was Samnites and Gauls fighting. When we move first century, you could kind of make up elaborate costumes, spend a lot of money. From the second century on, it gets a little more, things get more iffy. So it's hard to, I think most of the assumptions you make about gladiator combat are kind of work when you're dealing in the first century. We know that it appears, we got complaints. Where are we here? The gladiators fought each other. They fought wars. They sometimes participated in beast hunts. The accounts note that this provided sexual stimulation to the males and men in the audience, although men didn't approve of women handling weapons. There were upper class ladies did volunteer for this. Much of what we know about gladiatrices comes from Roman writers complaining about them. So Tacitus says here, the same, I'm quoting Tacitus here, the same year witnessed shows of gladiators as magnificent as those of the past. Many ladies of distinction, however, and senators disgraced themselves by appearing in the amphitheater. Tacitus doesn't specify what they did in the amphitheater. They might have fought each other. They may have hunted animals. It may just be the fact that this guy was an old fart. Who knows? And he doesn't specify what they actually did. I got notes here. Nero presented gladiator games of Ethiopian women fighting each other. The Wikipedia page talks about men, women, and children doing it. Titus had duels between gladiators at the grand opening of the Colosseum, but I believe they were slaves. Septimus Severus seems to ban the practice of female gladiators in about 200 CE. Apparently, gladiators fought the audience of jeering upper-class women. So we know basically that little sculpture there tells us that they existed. It confirms that they existed, but we don't have reliable information on them otherwise. First century CE probably was the least deadly period of gladiator combat. Back out again, and the actual combat. The gladiator combat was based on, I got a cat in front of me here, hang on. Gladiator combat were kind of ritualistic. There were strict rules. I don't have a referee in this picture. It is interesting though. There was what was that called again? How they work. There was a lot of ceremony here. Basically, on the night before, the gladiators would have a communal dinner. The fans could pay to come and watch them have dinner and watch all their admirable gladiators and stuff like that. On the day, there was a parade. The organizer would lead the parade, accompanied by lictors. There'd be a band with flutes, horns, and maybe a water-powered organ. In the morning, you have the exhibitions and the wild beast hunts. And wild beast hunts, they would execute prisoners at lunch. They would execute criminals at lunch, and the gladiator combat would take place in the afternoon. The gladiators fought with a. Where's that picture of that? I don't see it there. Typically, in the gladiator, I'm trying to figure out whether there were multiple gladiators out in the arena at one time. If you've got like 20 pairs of gladiators fighting, you're going to miss most of the action. You'd think you'd have two guys go out there and fight and leave it at that. I'm not sure. There was a referee. The referee would stop the fight, would watch, make sure everybody's following procedures and rules and stuff like that. I believe that includes making sure the gladiator stays in character. If you're a Thrax, you fight like a Thrax. If you're a Murmillo, you fight like a Murmillo. And referee would stop the fight if somebody got injured, and they would work out what to do next. At the end of the combat, the would submit, would be knocked down, or he'd put his finger up submitting. I think, is anybody doing that? Nobody's doing that in this video. Doesn't look like anybody's submitting. Some of the other, I'll point it out when I see it. And in the first century, with the emperor, the audience would get to decide whether the gladiator lived or died. Late in the combat, at some point, what you do if you're losing is you drop your shield and raise a finger on your left hand, requesting missio, and hopefully the audience likes you. What we're seeing here is a mosaic. What we're seeing here is a mosaic installed in a Roman villa. This is 4th century, so it's remarkably late. The implication here, well, you build a video. Number one, mosaics like this themselves are expensive. But what this mosaic is saying, this is a wealthy person. This is not a poor guy admiring gladiators. This is a wealthy guy showing that he held the gladiatorial games. He's showing, you can see the little mark there is a theta, which stands for Thanatos, and it means this guy is dead, and that guy is dead. So this guy's held the gladiator games. He's got, I don't know why there's a little one. I'm not saying he's an explanation for the little guy. He's held gladiator games probably for his dad's funeral, and 2 of them have been killed. So if you're holding a big event, you hire gladiators. Say you count your pennies. Okay, I can afford 10 gladiators. I can afford 16 gladiators. I don't kill anything, but if I get 8 gladiators, I can kill 2 of them, and that's way better. So this guy's showing off as well. It's like having a Lamborghini parked in the driveway. Gladiator combat disappeared. The Christian era, I guess, starts in the 4th century CE. The Christians disapproved of gladiator combat, but they didn't stamp it out. In his video on gladiators, Terry Jones claims that the gladiators games were actually eliminated by the barbarians. When the barbarians captured a city, they just stopped running they just shut down the arenas. They don't leave writing, so we know why the church was morally offended. The gladiators tended to be Christian. The invading barbarians tended to be Christians, but of course the barbarians are the people who were being used as gladiators, being slaughtered in the arena as gladiators, and gladiator combat became more dangerous in later years. It was less survivable. The last documented gladiator show was 393 CE, and that was when the 29 Saxons committed suicide, so it was a disaster. We don't really know what happened. The Christians didn't stamp it out. It sounds like the barbarians did it, but we're not really clear on any of that. I'm relying on Terry Jones, and Terry Jones has a whole book on barbarians and how the Romans were horrible to them. So not totally comfortable with that. Numbers. We don't have statistical records on gladiators. We're trying to figure that one out. I went through a biography of the Emperor Hadrian, and Anthony Everett claimed that there were 400 gladiator venues in the empire. They would stage 2 shows a year. They had teams of 30 gladiators fighting twice. This works out to about 12,000 gladiators, and he figured about 4,000 were killed every year. This is Hadrian the 2nd century AD, so we're moving out of the safer 1st century, I observe. Wikipedia quotes the same numbers. Where am I here? Wikipedia quotes the same numbers. And where am I here? But they don't use the reference I'm using. They're using something called, they're referring to a book called Colosseum, and that is by Keith Hopkins and Mary Beard. I know I'm very familiar with Mary Beard stuff. She's a good historian, so I'm regarding that as fairly well, what's the word? It's been subject to some peer, it's vague, but it's been subject to peer review. I went through there's a great courses video on gladiators. I watched that. They claim that the Senate was allowed to hold 2 gladiator shows a year. Augustus could hold as many as he wanted, but they only held 8 during his reign. That's interesting. In the 19th century, a French historian named Georges Ville worked out, I guess he was studying gladiator funeral monuments, and he worked out that 100 gladiator bouts ended in 19 fatalities. So that was a 1 in 10. If you were involved in gladiator combat in the 1st century AD, you had a 1 in 10 chance of being killed. In the 2nd and 3rd century ADs, roughly half of all matches got a gladiator killed. Your chance of survival about a quarter. According to my notes, my source is George Veal is a great historian, but I can't find anything on him in Wikipedia. You all know how many people volunteered to be gladiators? They very likely volunteered in the 1st century when they were historians to piss off, and when it was a lot safer. I don't know if volunteering for a 25% chance of being killed per event is a good idea. Gladiator safety. We don't know. We know that gladiators survived bouts during the Republic. We know that gladiators were killed in the Imperial. They were expensive as all hell. People didn't need to. I think I've got a source here that quotes the cost of a gladiator, but I couldn't relate that to anything else. It was 1,500 sesterces for a beginner, 15,000 for an experienced gladiator, and 100,000 sesterces for somebody popular. And that was to rent him for the event. If he was killed, they had to pay way more than that to the owner. So you need to be rich to kill them. We know that people volunteered. If you were running a gladiator event, would you let somebody smash that helmet with a sword? I took the effort to research the Indianapolis 500. What I did is I went on the thing and I sought down the starting lineup and I pulled down the starting lineup, identified the drivers, and I worked out what they died of. And my figures are that in 1930, 10 of the 38 drivers were killed car racing. In 1940, 8 of 34 were killed. 1950, 9 of 32, 1960, 7 of 32. I then went back and I sorted it for the top 10. I looked at all the top 10 qualifiers. I figured the top 10 guys are more aggressive and more reckless. And I'm getting 9 of 39. I have a total of 121 unique drivers, 31 of whom were killed car racing. So what we're seeing here is persistently a 1/4 chance of being, if you go into Indy racing, you have a 1/4 chance of being killed car racing. For the record, a bunch of these guys were killed were killed in plane crashes. And I didn't know that somewhere. Danger. Were killed in plane crashes, one of whom was doing aerobatics, and he apparently lost control of the plane, smashed into an apartment building, and took out 3 people on the ground with him. By the sound of it, there's a lot of get there-itis. You're in Europe and you want to get from A to B, and you do the Buddy Holly thing. Well, let's go, come on, move it. And you jump in and take off into a storm and the plane crashes. But this is well documented. We know that Indy race in 1960, an Indy racer understood that this was dangerous. I've got a book on the twilight of sail, and they mentioned that a boy growing up in Gloucester, Massachusetts, late in the 19th century had a 50% chance of dying at sea. No women screaming for sex with him. Your ship gets rammed by an ocean liner. The boat capsizes. You get run ashore. And bad things can happen. I don't know what the survivor fishermen in ancient Rome was. They would have been using open boat. They wouldn't have been running over ocean liners, but they would have been open boats. So it could have been much safer. If you're thinking of volunteering to be a gladiator, the fact that gladiators have short lives would not be a big issue. I did find, what have I got here? I did find a lost off on tomb inscriptions. There was a listing here of a gladiator from Sicily named Flamma. He fought 34 times in his career. He was reprieve stans missus, fought to a draw 9 times, reprieve missus, which means defeated but spared 4 times. And he was listed at 34 years old. And the implication here is I guess he was killed fighting, but in 34 combats, 9 draws, 4 defeats, and he survived quite some time. There's a note here. What are we doing? Yeah, the others don't have numbers. Final thought: professional wrestling. One of the things we know with the gladiator equipment, a lot of gladiator helmets conceal the gladiator states. I would wonder if it got fake, if somebody would stake, you know, if you're running Gladiator combat, could you fake it? In my opinion, you could. A lot of the Gladiator kit conceals the Gladiator's identity. If he is, you know, goes into the arena and fights to the death, and fights and he's sweating his blood all over the place, and you run into him in the market a week later, you wouldn't know. But like somebody cheated somehow, it would, you know, damned expensive. And let's face it, if you're the Gladiator and your owner's preparing to cheat like this, it's not like you're going to condemn them for it. I looked at professional wrestling. Professional wrestling features all kinds. Another thing is the Gladiators are expected to do all kinds of cool, fun combat moves. They, you know, wave the sword around. A lot of that stuff is dangerous. You can't. The Roman army manuals of the Gladiator state, the Roman soldiers don't slash at people. They run. They thrust the weapon and stab them. That's where you get into his vital organs. Given a Gladiator's lack of body armor, that would be ineffective. You just kind of hook the shield aside, step up, and run them through. It'd be really dangerous unless the Gladiators don't use deadly techniques. So we really have to wonder. I would also wonder if the patrician Roman writers would report Gladiator fraud. And I ask you all a question. Worldwide Wrestling, I've got a note on my slide here. In 1989, World Wrestling announced that it was sports entertainment. This apparently is a tax issue. Sports entertainment as opposed to real fighting. Prior to say 1980, wrestling claimed it was real, claimed to be real. Question: can anybody name a piece of media accurately describing wrestling as fraud? In other words, somebody may have written out something saying that Gladiator combat was fraudulent, but it wasn't. They only a couple people did, and it wasn't continued on. I can identify. Can anybody identify anything like that?
No.
I can actually do this. I've actually got two examples. I've actually got two things here. I've got a biography of Gregory Pappy Boyington, the U.S. Marine air racer in World War II. He commanded a Corsair squadron. He was shot down and captured by the Japanese, and he was tortured and starved and used as slave labor, and his health improved because he was an alcoholic. The Japanese didn't understand what they were dealing with. He returned to the United States, and he had a hard time finding work. But one of the things he was doing was refereeing professional wrestling. And there's a really entertaining description of professional wrestling at the end of the book. But you got to ask, 2,000. If somebody comes back 2,000 years from now, will they find Gregory Boyington's biography? I can do a second one. There's a movie called Nothing Sacred. It was made in the 1930s with Carol Lombard and Frederick March, I believe. Frederick March is a reporter, and he's looking for a sensational story. Carol Lombard is playing a girl who's dying of some horrible disease, and Frederick March decides, we're going to make her do a sort of queen for the day, take her and, you know, make her queen for the day and show her a great time and make her last weeks of her life really good. Meanwhile, Carol Lombard finds out she's not dying. She's going to recover. She's going to be okay. And of course, Frederick, and everything follows logically and crazy. At some point in the movie, they're in, I guess, Madison Square Gardens watching a wrestling match, and she's cheering and everything else. And he's trying to explain to her that it's all fake. It's a good movie. I recommend it. It's also a very early color movie. That's not to say Gladiator.
Howard, try to speak slower,
Okay.
because I see men.
Sorry, I get two references here. Basically, Baba Black Sheep by Gregory Boyington has a description of what it's like to be a professional wrestling referee, along with the obligatory wrestling jokes. One of the wrestlers was commenting, he needs to scare himself. He looked out in the audience and reminded himself that all those people out there vote. And the other one is the movie Nothing Sacred, which I recommend. It's a fun movie with Frederick March and Carol Lombard. And Frederick March is sitting there trying to explain to Carol Lombard that the wrestling is all fake. Would this stuff be around 2,000 years from now when people tried to make sense of professional wrestling? So we don't know. So Definitely gladiators got killed. Definitely it was a dangerous activity. Most of the accounts I'm saying said that very few gladiators survived in the end. A 10% chance of dying per bout. Not bad over 1 or 2 bouts, but if you get 10 or 15, 20 bouts, your odds of living to old age are well below 50%. But if they were faking it, we wouldn't know. And that's basically it. Any questions?
No.
Yeah, no, that was pretty interesting.
Oh, I did miss. I forgot about the emperors fighting in the arena. Hang on. I knew I missed
Oh
something.
yes, son of Marcus Aurelius.
Well, this is
Commodus.
interesting.
Famous.
I'm going on Wikipedia lists Caligula, Titus, Hadrian, Lucius Verus, Caracalla, Geta, and Didius Julianus as performing in the arena in some capacity, presumably not taking too many risks. I'm having I don't know why I missed Commodus on there, because he's the one that definitely did. I'm having troubles with. I tried to look this stuff up. Didius Julianus was the guy that purchased the power after the murder of whoever took over after Commodus. He was in his late 50s. He was in no shape to be running around the arena, and he was murdered. He only had about 70 days. He was quickly murdered. I'm having a hard time believing he did something in the arena. Hadrian was a responsible leader. I've got a biography of him here. I went searching for it for reference to gladiator combat, and I can't find
never
it.
heard of this. Hadrian participating in the combat.
I've got a detailed biography of the guy. No mention of him doing it. Overwhelming evidence that he was a responsible emperor. So I'm really puzzled.
He was probably one of the most responsible, because he recognized the limitations of the expansion that happened during the Trajan and traded some territories for peace.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at Wikipedia. I'm having troubles with it. Titus is also listed as having appeared in the arena, and again, he was a responsible emperor. And I looked, I don't have any good Titus information on, but I couldn't find anything. Caligula was a twit. I forgot, somehow I didn't get comments on my list, he did it. Caracalla and Geta were told to stick together, pay the troops, to hell with the rest, and I guess Caracalla murdered Geta, but as far as I know, we didn't do it in the arena. They were not responsible. So Geta didn't last very long. Caracalla lasted 3 years before he was murdered. Did he appear in the arena? I'm puzzled at the article. So we're looking at Caligula and we're looking at Commodus. I think apparently Commodus fought. I think he was I forget what he was, but I think they fought with wooden swords. Obviously, if you're his opponent, if you're the gladiator fighting against him,
I don't know.
You're being told not to hurt him.
Exactly. I don't think any gladiator would think about hurting emperor.
Well, if you're going to be killed, what the heck? You must as well take Commodus with you. But there has to be a clear understanding you're going to survive the event.
I don't know.
So I don't know. The Wikipedia article has a list. I think the list sucks. I can't confirm any of it.
Yeah, I read that Commodus was pretty competent. I don't know if he could stand up to every gladiator, but I thought he was kind of pretty good.
He presented himself as Hercules, so he had to be a reasonably big guy. It was something. This is something I didn't bring up when I was discussing Pyrrhus the other week. I was wondering how some guy how commander of an army could go rampaging around, slaughtering everything in sight. Well, there's an advantage to being a king. You grow up, you get lots of food, lots of red meat. You grow up big and strong. We know that most of the medieval English kings were big, strapping 6-footers, even if the regular English guy was a little scrawny little run. The royal families were big hulking brutes. They were bigger than everybody else. So Commodus is probably a big, well-developed, big, well-fed, well-developed guy.
Yeah.
But still, you have to be careful not. I can't see the event working unless your opponent expects to survive the day. And if you're going to do it over and over and over again, treachery is going to blow up in your face or get a sword stuck through you. Any questions? I must have missed something.
No, and you spoke slower, so it was
Right.
very good.
Thanks.
Yeah, I
I'm
don't
more
know why
comfortable-
do we have echo. Yeah, maybe it's because Zach and I logged on to the same account. I don't know.
I think so.
Could be where am I here? Let's go there. Let's find the- There's my share screen button. Get that turned off. All I have to do is I'm gonna go here. Mhm. Oh, it's still gonna work. There we go. Stop share.
I
think
guess
it's
I'm gonna
probably-
stop
this is-
recording. Let me stop recording as well.